This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/rubyrogues.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. On our panel today, we have Eric Berry.
Hey there.
And David Richards.
Hey, hey.
And I'm David Kimura, and today we're talking with two special guests, Justin Searls.
Howdy.
And Josh Greenwood.
Hey everybody.
So I don't know if we've ever done two interviews, or at least not on the time that I've been on the podcast, done two guests at the same time. So this should be interesting. At least you guys work for the same company. But Justin, would you mind giving us a bit of background, who you work for, how people know you on the internet, and all that good stuff?
Well, who Josh and I work for is a software agency called Test Double. We're like one of the first, I think, like fully 100% remote software consultancies. So we work with clients all over the place. Basically, our pitch is just if your team's looking for senior software developers and having a hard time hiring full-timers, or are interested in some additional expertise from outsiders who are really good at Ruby and JavaScript and all that, work with us on a contract basis, and we just kind of become members of your team remotely. So that's what Josh and I both do there, although Josh actually gets to do that, and I get to sit in a lot of sales meetings.
Awesome. And you're from Columbus, Ohio, right, Justin?
Yep. I live in Columbus, and I'm actually a Michigander, but I relocated here 11 years ago because I wanted an economy with jobs in it. So I'm kind of a reluctant Ohioan.
Yeah, you just lost a bit of respect for me. Sorry. I'm a big Buckeye fan, or I'm a Buckeye fan. I wouldn't say big, but yeah, it's all right. I still like you. And Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am based in Louisville, Kentucky. I actually grew up in northern Kentucky, which is basically just a suburb of Cincinnati. So I'm a native Kentuckian, and like Justin, proud of it. I also, like Justin said, work for Test Double and get to work on clients all over the U.S. and have an absolute blast doing it. I really like to write Ruby and Rails. Lately, I've been getting really into Elm, and I'm super excited about the direction that's heading. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. And you two recently did a conference together titled There's Nothing New. You want to talk about that talk? I watched it the other day, and it was actually really entertaining. I really liked the history and the progression of things, and it gave me a lot of flashbacks as well as made me cry a bit. So you want to talk about your talk a bit?
Well, you mentioned that this is the first time you guys have had a pair interview, and the reason is that the we're here to talk about that talk and some of the research and maybe some of the nostalgia that went into it, where we did that as co-presenters. And normally co-presenting a talk is really challenging. And so we just had very discrete responsibilities. Like my responsibility was to provide color commentary and just criticize everything. And Josh's responsibility was to do hundreds of hours of research and watch a bunch of conference talks and select the kind of greatest hits from the last 15 years of Ruby's history in the West.
Sounds fair to me.
Yeah.
Justin also thought it sounded fair.
Well, that's what happens when you're the boss, right? You get to delegate. So.
Right, which is why I need Josh here today, because I don't think I could really represent the talk very well without him and his gigantic spreadsheets.
Yeah, when the DHH example blog app came up, I think I just about lost it. I had seen that a long time ago, and I had almost forgotten about it. But then you guys re-brought it back up, so thank you for that. It was really great.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuggets in there that are just, tickle nostalgia of people who've been in the Rails community since, 2004 through 2007. One of them that Josh found that I'd forgotten about was this online apple.com ad that they did with 37 signals, and they interviewed, Jason and David for it, and it's the cheesiest thing in the world. It's links to this and everything else we reference are up on our blog page around the talk. But Josh, just so people have like a little bit more context, could you explain like a little bit of the purpose of the talk? Because it wasn't just to be a nostalgia fest.
Yeah, definitely. So where we were coming from on this talk was we were kind of positioning it as Justin was someone who's been in the Ruby community longer than I have. And one of the ways we were thinking about this was I had a whole bunch of questions about Ruby is the way that it is today, and I wonder why that is. So some examples of questions were like, why does everyone use Vim and Emacs, and like no one's using IDEs, like all these other people, these other technologies using these really cool IDEs? Why does everyone care about testing so much? Where are people coming from with like convention over configuration? So where I was coming from is I came in at like 2012. So like I came in and my first job, I was already using Git. We were using Ruby. It was just kind of standard practice to me. All the things that we do today, I didn't really get the experience of the pain and the things that brought those into fruition. And so we kind of started with a bunch of questions like that I mentioned, and I would ask Justin like, hey, why is it the way that it is? And he'd be like, this, and this, go check out this person's work, go see, read all the blog posts from this. And we kind of collectively together started to realize that there's a ton of history that has kind of been, I don't want to say forgotten, but we don't revisit as often as we should. And there's so much learnings in the community, and people have built up quite the community. And we wanted to understand like all of the underpinnings of it so that we could not repeat the same mistakes. Anything you want to add to that, Justin?
No, I mean, I'm actually really curious about the panel members, if they saw the talk, their take on it, and if they didn't, just kind of how they feel about how well, Ruby as a community is at retrospecting and placing the new things that we do inside their historical context in a way that's like digestible to especially new people.
When I started Ruby, it was back in 2008. And if you remember back then, they had a website that was dedicated to how many days has it been since the last Ruby drama. Do you remember that?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So I think as a community, we've really grown up quite a bit. We've learned a lot from the exit with Why the Lucky Stiff. We learned a lot from all of the dramas that happened. We learned a lot when Merb and Rails came together, and all of a sudden it became not as popular. And I think that we've learned a lot as far as not abandoning gems as quickly as we have been and be more supportive of that. But I think that's more over the last few years, that's become really more of a thing. Have you also seen that progression?
Oh, I could for sure see the progression as I was watching talks, like the maturity level and the things that so if I would watch a talk from like 2008, it was a lot more like exploratory. A lot of the talks were. They were like, hey, here's this idea. Like I'm just kind of thinking about it. I'm poking at this gem. Here's this thing I built this weekend. Once you started getting closer to more recent time, it was more of, okay, we've got a lot of these existing applications. We've used this gem. Here's how to decouple that, or here's how to use it in a more effective way, or here's a good way to refactor your application. You can kind of see the progression of a lot of people starting with Ruby in the beginning and just doing experiments and playing around and a lot of that. And it seemed, at least from the talks that I saw, there was certainly a progression towards maturity. And it kind of mirrored maybe the maturity of the applications that the average presenter was working on at the time.
No, that's really insightful. Huh.
And, I think a lot of that has to do with the available resources. Back when I started, around 2009, 2010, there were not that many resources out there online to learn Ruby. You had the guides, and then you had Railscast, which was a godsend, for Ryan Bates. And other than that, you had to basically discover it yourself, read a book or, just dive into IRB and try to figure out, how do you do this? What's the best way to do this? What's going to be faster? And I think that in some ways, we've lost a lot of that. I think we're going to start seeing a shift in the Rails community and Ruby community where people aren't using Ruby because they love it. They're doing it because that's where the jobs that they want are. And I think we're going to start seeing people who are coming, more new age, starting off with Rails, starting off with Ruby, but they don't really have that foundational knowledge of experimenting and diving into why does this work or whatever. They're just relying on the Rails magic to happen. And I think that's going to hurt the community for a bit of time until we refocus and, start getting back to where we started from.
So I'm going to jump in and push back on that a little bit because it's easy to lament that from our vantage point. But when part of our research, we interviewed Dave Thomas and Chad Fowler, and both of them expressed multiple times this almost period of grieving that they went through with the rise of Rails, because what it marked was like the death of that fun. We love Ruby because we're all about PLT or programming language design. We're doing really, really creative and bizarro things. And, Dave called out explicitly that as soon as, Rails came along, there was this sudden, urgent capitalistic need to provide educational resources to train an army of, web developers. And Chad viewed that as a really big turning point where the community sort of, he was started by using language like died on the phone with me. But I think I was able to get him back away from that a bit. And in here, he's talking about, 2005, 2006, before I was seriously involved in Ruby at all. And I'm sure where, the floodgates opened and a whole bunch of Ruby's equivalent of the Eternal September, began and all these novices flooded in, who are now, relatively old hat complaining about, how commoditized maybe Ruby has become in the broader market.
Yeah. No,
I was there for that. I was there for that. I came in 2004 and, I was looking for a specific, Rails. I was building some stuff in PHP at MVC. And, so I didn't get in on the love of the language the way others did. But I was surrounded by that, which I enjoyed. It made me feel confident. But it was interesting because I didn't really have the luxury of being able to just goof around and learn things. I needed to do things. So I was part of that, killing the language, I guess, or, in those first few years where, it had to make sense. We used to have those conversations around how are we going to get paid to do Rails or Ruby, really. We liked Ruby, but it was this hard, I think, compromise that was hard for people that loved the language and for what they could try and the freedom it gave us to just build things. And it's kind of a weird, I guess that commercial thing comes in and can ruin everything or it changes it. It poisons the well a little bit.
Yeah, but at the same time, it also does promote some stability. I think that with gyms like Devise or some other really popular ones, you don't have to worry about your authentication or pundit for authorization or can. Those things are pretty well established now. So I think one great thing about it is that new developers can come in and start being productive faster. So, but I don't know if they would still have a lot of the foundational knowledge unless they went on and did their own research. But I think that we are now at the stable part of Rails where it's not going anywhere. It's pretty much here to stay.
And I think that's actually like a big motivator behind this talk was I'd given a talk last year, sort of like a satirical talk where I was filling in for Sam Phippen that was ostensibly about RSpec, but it was really about the maturity in the Ruby community and how we've reached this point where, our most creative and kind of colorful and artistic and exploratory days are, in a sense, behind us because we've like reached the point where we've solved most of these problems, and so there's just a different set of people in the room. But it also means that like if people have a creative itch that they want to scratch, they might be inclined to look outside of Ruby and its community altogether. And so the purpose of this talk is to like look back on ways in which people were inspired by Ruby, the language, fell in love with it, and did kind of creative and thoughtful things, or thought about principles like path of least surprise and values like programmer happiness that you really can't find analogs in other programming languages, and it's really kind of core to the foundation of what made Ruby Ruby, but doesn't get talked about to people who are joining Ruby these days, where it's just another option for their MVC framework language of choice.
One thing I've noticed, though, too, is the export of that, which has been, I think, beautiful because so I've done a lot of startups in my career, and at one of them, I was with some Ruby developers I knew, and we joined up with some Java and Scala developers. And so we were talking about some of these principles, and they were just kind of like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Like, it was easy to export these good ideas that they hadn't heard before. It was good for a startup community where in an organization that's got to prove itself every day, these principles actually have a lot of traction. They change how we think. They get us tighter to tight delivery loops. They make it easier to consume what we've already built. And so I like that we went there, and it's true. There's different people in the room now, but when that goes outside of the Ruby community, it also does well, continues to do well.
And I think it's also good that we're now starting to get options. So instead of saying, this is how you have to do something like file uploading, before you had Dragonfly or Paperclip, but then things like Carrier Wave and Shrine from Janko came out, and now you have active storage, which is baked right into Rails. So I think it's awesome that we are starting to reach, or we have reached that point of maturity where there is a preferred way to do something, but you have options. You don't have to follow this one path or this one way because that's your only way to do it without writing your own library. And then with the introduction of the JavaScript storm that's been taking us by surprise, I'm sure there's been 2 new JavaScript frameworks released since we started this call. And I've been playing around with Stimulus quite a bit. And I think that is another great option for interacting with the DOM. So if you haven't played around with that a bit, I definitely encourage you to check it out because I've added it into some of my existing applications, and it took me a few minutes to do. I read through the docs, I recorded a screencast on it, and I literally was able to add in Stimulus JavaScript framework, add in my components, and get it up and running in just a matter of minutes. And it did exactly what I needed to do without the complexities of something like React.
Let me ask you guys a question. I want to bring it back to Test Double a little bit. You are approached for all sorts of different projects. I'd like to kind of dig in a little bit and find out how much of what you do is completely in Ruby and Rails. How often do you have to branch out from there? And are you able to utilize, or do you utilize the templates and all that stuff that allows you to quickly build a pre-made, basically an alpha app? I'd like to know your process. I've been fascinated by you guys. I'd like to know your process on how you can do that so effectively. But do you also have to branch out of Rails because of one way or another? And are you concerned that perhaps in the future Ruby and Rails might not be as relevant? And how does Test Double plan on handling that?
Oh man, yeah, this is a question that I wish people asked me more often because I agree. I think it's a really important series of distinctions that you can look at different consulting companies and they all kind of have their different focus and specialty. But what ours has always been is that our people tend to be really senior. I think like average year's experience is like 10. Most people came up through like Java, .NET. A lot of us spent time as like agile coaches before we found Ruby, worked through Ruby, and then, got excited about what you could do with like Ajax and front-end JavaScript and all the various frameworks there. And so in general, our people are, they come to the table as polyglots and looking for the best tool for the job. And so, like we've got, to answer your first question, we've got probably half our portfolio is primarily Ruby and Rails, and the other half is split between Node.js or just pure front-end JavaScript. We've got some Elm projects, some Elixir projects. And the reason that we don't necessarily have like a pre-baked template for like how to build something quickly is because we're not really build you an MVP kind of shop. We can do that, but there's probably firms that are like better optimized for that. Like one that comes to mind right away is like Alpha Django in Ann Arbor, where Steve Schwartz really optimizes for getting people off the ground quickly. We're more like a staff integration firm. We like work with existing teams who already have big complex problems because we really like to chew on, that complexity of the application once it's gotten big and there's a bunch of technical debt and the testing story is starting to create pain, because we've just got so much experience by visiting so many different teams that we're really good at untangling a lot of that stuff. And that's a lot more, I think, rewarding work because it's helping other developers and businesses day-to-day lives. But also it's like not as rote and repetitive or as repeatable as just like building a new greenfield app over and over again. Right. But the reason that we, have been advocating teams use Ruby and Rails is because it's still the most productive, best tool for the job for lots of straightforward web applications. Our footprint is mostly like flyover states in the US, where there's just like a lot of blue chip companies that have a lot of like custom software needs that can be summarized as, a handful of like back-end admin people just need basic CRUD operations to automate some portion of their business. They don't need like a full-blown single page app. They don't need to worry about the kind of like scaling problems that something like Elixir and Phoenix might solve. Like they just need something reliable that's conventional that like another developer could follow along and pick it up. And then what the world is telling them is everyone does JavaScript, so only hire JavaScript developers, and everything is Node React, so only do that. And then I see all these startups incur 9 months of developer churn and wheel reinvention over and over again to kind of reinvent the universe before they kind of sprinkle on their custom application on top, which was exactly the problem that Rails was invented to solve. But it's not. Maybe the whole point of this talk is like part of this theme that new does not equal good, but we are so geared to only look at the top of our social media feeds and the front page of Hacker News that anything that's old is thought of as bad or outdated or not, applicable anymore, when there's actually like lots of really, really valuable stuff that just isn't the newest thing. And so that's why we keep coming back to this well, to try to help people re-engage with like why Rails is still the best choice for entire categories of applications, even if it's not the trendy thing.
This takes me to a metaphor another senior developer told me recently, and I just keep thinking about this, and I think it's saying the same thing Justin is saying, which is our mind is like a garden, and so we have to maintain it. And all the new, it just keeps barraging our attention, but we need to see that or connect that with something we're doing, so that we can make a decision. What are we after? Turns out Rails solved this a long time ago. Turns out I'm not going to need the scale that I'd kind of like to play with. I'm just going to need a solid solution that somebody can inherit later. So those kinds of thinking, I tend to let myself get a little too relaxed sometimes because I get excited about technology. And then I realize, no, my mind is a garden. I've got to maintain something that's going to be around for a while and be responsible with the ideas.
I'd also add that I think Rails positions itself really, really nicely for the types of clients that we come into, where we can. Our hope is that we can leave at some point. We don't want to, be here for forever. We want to position the team to be successful without us. And Rails is really nice. Ruby is really nice because there's generally less than 5 ways, I'll say, to write something. We tend to use patterns, and we tend to build things in a similar sort of way so that the next developer coming along doesn't have to go through this minefield of figuring out how does this application work, where do things live, where do the files go, how are things named. There's a very low barrier to entry, and we really like it that way. It kind of it positions itself nicely to focusing less on the technology and more about the domain that we're trying to solve for. Maybe we're in a banking application, or maybe we're in healthcare or something. But we want to focus on that, and not necessarily, hey, where do your controllers live?
So, Justin and Josh, when you guys get a new contract, how long do your contracts usually last for? And what, because you guys are an agency and you do get exposed to new types of applications quite often, what are your secrets, or so-called secrets, to quickly onboard one of your developers and get them integrated into a team, getting familiar with the code base and all that good stuff, so that they can be useful sooner than later?
I think two thoughts. I mean, to answer the question of like how long contracts are, they're always open-ended. Part of, I think, working in an agile way means that you need to accept that failure is an option. And so all of our contracts are week to week, which is really great from a low risk contracting perspective, and really difficult for my co-founder Todd and I from a financial forecasting perspective. But in hindsight, we can look back, and most of our engagements are 3 to 9 months long, because that's roughly how long it takes for us to come in, do productive work, build rapport, and then leave some kind of lasting impact so that the team can kind of continue improving even after we've left it. How we onboard quickly is I think we're just taking advantage of the fact that, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard the advice that when they're starting their career, consulting is a great way to get lots and lots of experience quickly. Humans are pattern recognition machines. And if you give us a whole lot of projects and different teams to work on and different types of applications, we start to, just without even realizing it, subconsciously develop a lot of pathways that shortcut our learning to get us up and running and productive and able to, frankly, cope with a lot of different types of situations effectively. It makes us stronger communicators, and it also gives us a template for drawing out, lasting lessons. And I think that's one reason why you see so many people who do a lot of agency work become prolific writers and speakers, bloggers and thought lords, sharing stuff, because you start to see the parts of any given project that are, or any given team that are special, and the ones that are kind of common wisdoms that seem to apply to lots of situations.
I've also found that naturally I have this tendency that I want to go breadth first on all problems, and I want to fully understand all problems and fully understand all applications before I start to go depth first. And while I've been at Test Double, I've had to push back on that and realize that I can be so much more effective when I can understand the problem and then just go depth first straight into that problem. And the breadth first kind of comes along. And like Justin said, we got very good at pattern recognition and expanding that quickly. But forcing myself to just go straight down an application, a particular call stack to figure out what exactly I'm trying to do, for this ticket, for this hour that I'm working on. That's a really effective tool. We also really enjoy pairing and use that as a tool as much as possible to ask as many questions as we can and get up and running very quickly.
Cool. Has there ever been a project where you guys started on and you were like, wow, this is just too much?
For you, the listeners of Ruby Rogues, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings.
Well, it's in my experience, that's every project, right? I think that part of the problem with coming into any existing application is that the amount of just encoded complexity, all the naming and the layers and the unconventional, but even, justified or not decisions that went into it. It represents this like tremendous embedded encoded body of knowledge, and you weren't there for those decisions. So you don't have the reference point. And for me, I remember when I was starting my consulting career, the first 3 or 4 years, I would just feel this, like I would literally get tight in the chest and it would struggle to breathe because I felt this sense of immersion, like I wasn't going to be able to even tread water and get by. And some people nowadays, I think they might point at that and call it sort of like similar to the symptoms of imposter syndrome, but I think it's an entirely rational response to the extent of digital complexity that a lot of these applications accrue, like because there's just not a physical analog for them really. And so yeah, almost every project has its own kind of aspects that are overwhelming, but even the more straightforward ones, we have a certain capacity above and beyond, maybe to the understanding of like the technical system. They almost always offer a whole lot of interesting people communication process, organizational challenges, and even on the quote unquote like easier technical problems that we have to solve. It usually just gives us more time to kind of help grow and improve like that team's ability to operate in other ways. And it seems like we ping pong back and forth between those two modes.
Where do you see Ruby in the next few years as far as adoption, as far as capabilities? Because you've got a great big long tail of projection. Where do you see it what do you see it becoming? Do you see Test Double still pushing Rails as the primary solution in 3 to 5 years?
What we don't see, maybe to the same point about like existing systems have so much embedded complexity, like something Rails has going for it is like a decade of thoughtful application of like how to make an integrated application framework that checks these like 150 absurd boxes that need to be checked in order to be a successful full-blown application. And where a lot of time is being spent in open source is JavaScript frameworks where everything kind of gets pulled out from under you so frequently that like I'm not sure you'd see maybe an equivalent of like maybe like the Ember project for backend plus front end application development, just because there's an anti-framework bias and like the work isn't being done. And so I don't see some new upstart alternative popping out in the distance. But at the same time, I think that the future of Ruby seems pretty bright. The Ruby 3x3 stuff where people have found all sorts of creative ways to make Ruby faster, like the work on JIT experimentation, Aaron Patterson's work on compacting GC. A lot of it's there to kind of keep Ruby up to snuff as like a modern, fast enough language for the types of problems it solves. And then on the other end, this is like a moonshot. This maybe isn't 5-year realistic, but like when I saw Gary Bernhardt's The Birth and Death of JavaScript talk a few years ago, where he predicted satirically that like JavaScript was going to become the base runtime, and with WebAssembly on top, we're going to actually see entire applications emerge. And so like people wouldn't actually ever write raw JavaScript anymore, but rather like we could get MRI working inside of Chrome on top of WebAssembly, and everything's just fast enough that we could build, front end applications with Ruby and are no longer limited to just JavaScript. And we're already seeing that literally this year with people building small Rust applications and having a tool chain from Mozilla to compile Rust down to WebAssembly code. And so my hope is that path, the JavaScript is everywhere, the ubiquity of JavaScript actually creates more freedom and creativity to experiment with different languages without that sense that everything must be written in JavaScript.
I'd like to add too that I think that we discount the number of companies out there using Ruby today and just not talking about it that much. There's so many, and Justin probably gets to talk to more of them than I do, but so many medium and large companies that have large Ruby teams writing Ruby every single day, and it's solving their business needs and working really effectively for them. And they don't make the front page of Hacker News, building this admin dashboard that saves all this time, but it's a really, really effective tool for them. And I don't see that. I cannot imagine that changing in the next few years.
Yeah. Well, with the about the Ruby 3x3, I'm kind of now just hoping for the same speed as Ruby 2 with the light of the meltdown and that exploit coming to light. Now I've seen some slowdowns on our environment, so do you think we're going to be able to get past that? I know Intel has some workarounds and stuff, but the slowing of the processors, how do you think that's going to affect the community?
Well, it doesn't. It's a broad-based thing, right? It affects everybody. It's the whole processor slowing down. So I think the only people really affected are Intel's short-term stock market. Stock price takes a hit, and then its long-term stock price goes up because it's able to sell us processors that magically fix this problem with like a different hardware architecture 2 years from now. So I don't think Ruby is ever going to get singled out for this problem. And I know that there's a lot of people who are on the Ruby CVE team, that like the security team, that like really take great care to make sure that if there's ever a security problem, it's not Ruby specific, and we in our community don't have egg on our face. And I feel like our track record actually in security is really pretty good compared to a lot of other environments.
I'd also add to that if you're choosing Ruby, you probably aren't quite as your CPU intensive needs probably aren't quite as high as if you were choosing another stack, and so you might be a little bit less susceptible to picking another solution just based on a 30% hit, let's say, on CPU usage.
I have one thing I'd like to bring up that's a little bit orthogonal to all of this, but I just want to, because the people on this panel have just, their own story, their own kind of Ruby history to share. And while we have, like 40 links up on our blog of like stuff that we liked, or that tickled our, nostalgia buttons when we went and looked back on things we loved about Ruby, I'm curious if there's any kind of forgotten favorites. I was going to say Ruby gems, but I don't mean that literally. I mean like just moments and tools and experiences from Ruby's past that you think say something about why you love Ruby and that the community should remember.
Ryan Bates, for sure. Ryan Bates made my career.
Yay.
Exactly. That's, so much of, and I know a lot of, most people, I mean, every single one of us can attribute Ryan Bates to a lot of our success and excitement. And every single week you think, or every single few days, you'd say, okay, well, what am I going to learn now? What has he gone out and done the research and showed how to do now? And in all reality, I never went to college. I'm slightly slower when it comes to book reading, and I built my career on top of online videos. People like Dave here, who has Drifting Ruby, doing a huge service to the community. And those are the type of things that I look back with the most fondest memories of the online training and the free online training and the very inexpensive online training that helps us become better programmers. And at the time, Ryan was kind of setting the standards as he went. The how do you do it in Rails really was determined by Ryan Bates because of his massive, massive influence.
I like that. I used Ryan Bates a lot as well. Really influential. It was the confidence he gave us that, okay, I get it. I can see how to grow an app this way. There was always that pressure for the Ruby way, the Rails way, and finding a way to make something like Test Double does, that somebody can inherit, and that it looks and feels like it should, or that there's not too many barriers between what I do and what the next person needs to inherit. So I really like that about him. There was something this list, by the way. I mean, I've been looking at it. I recommended this talk about 3 weeks ago on this podcast. It's just a fabulous talk, and there's not a lot missing, but there was one thing I was thinking about. The story I was able to watch a little bit firsthand. At the end of one of the Ruby confs, Carl Youngblood and Kobe Rehnquist were sitting in the back of the room, and they said, "Man, we really would like to be able to watch these conference talks again and be able to have the slides there." And so they just created Confreaks, and it was that go-to spirit, that can-do spirit that really, we did great things in the community. So I'm kind of nostalgic for that, or I remember that that's what our roots are. That, yeah, okay, well, let's just go create something great then. Here's a problem, let's solve it. And that's definitely part of our heritage.
And, for me, I think that some of my fondest memories are really working with other languages, doing Pascal and Basic and C++, and then moving to Ruby and then seeing just how beautiful it is, how much more enjoyable it was to write the Ruby, just the experimentation of just writing simple little Ruby scripts to solve my day-to-day problems that I was having. One of my first little scripts that I wrote was something to just go into each one of my logs and just truncate them. It was just something dumb and something trivial, but, I used Ruby to quickly solve that problem. And, those are my fondest memories of just the experimentation and just that initial, quote, love at first sight for it.
One thing along these lines I did not get to share in the talk because it's maybe it's a little bit too vain, and podcasts are long enough and freeform enough to have a little vanity, I guess. The thing that got me hooked in the Ruby community was the kind of underground network of meetups all over the place. I remember in 2006 going to one of the first meetings of the Great Lakes Ruby Brigade or Great Lakes Ruby Group in Grand Rapids, and meeting people like Aaron Schaap from Elevator Up, who still runs Elevator Up, and meeting Daniel Morrison, who still runs Collective Idea in Holland, Michigan, and Brandon Keepers, who's like the open source director guy at GitHub still, and Mark Van Holstein and Zach Dennis, who run Mutually Human out of Grand Rapids still. Like that community started with, hey, we've got these Rails apps, and sometimes I remember the problem of the day was the gem installs on production tend to be older than the gem installs locally, and then production just breaks randomly all the time. How could we not do that? And somebody gave a little presentation on how to synchronize your gem versions. This is pre-RVM and gem sets, much less bundler. How to sync all that stuff using this new tool called Capistrano. And that kind of knowledge sharing was just infectious and contagious. And I saw it repeated as I traveled all over the country and the world. That was special about Ruby, and I don't think was ever quite emulated quite the same way in any other language environment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to kind of take it to the next level, Webastrano was a godsend. Because Capistrano is fun, but Webastrano is great, right?
What is Webastrano?
I think that
I haven't heard of that yet.
It's just a web interface to sit on top of Capistrano. I used to use it a lot at a company back in the early 2010s. So it was really, really, really handy.
I think an analog to that, to the community aspect that Justin just mentioned, is the kind of open source by default mentality that it seems like. So I started with Ruby. So this came as a surprise to me that as we were looking at resources, a lot of people were talking about Ruby is really great for open source. And I thought, well, what makes something great for open source? It seems like that's just a normal thing. We should just be able to, push it up to GitHub and it should just be easy. And it was the tooling around the open source, having things like Ruby gems, having things like bundler, and just making it super, super easy just to have some code and push it up to the world, and somebody else can use it. And it seemed like some of the history predated me, so I can't speak exactly to it, but it seems like Ruby definitely was on the cutting edge of that. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, if there were other efforts there that predated Ruby's.
Well, I think it's definitely the case. It's reminding me of a time when I was asked by an executive, why should we open source this project? And I had to actually think about all the value that we create. And it's kind of default. I mean, there were things that happened before, but a lot of those licenses were really restrictive or careful or carefully worded by lawyers versus the MIT license, which is common in Ruby, which is, yeah, take it, just don't come at me for it. And, just the clarity that we're building something together, and there's a lot of value that we can create together. And having that perspective is, I think, huge in the community, but also Ruby grasped it early, and it seemed to always be in the DNA of the community.
One other really interesting bit that I found in the same sort of vein is the connection to the Agile community and Ruby. So dating myself again, I came into my first job and we had stand-ups and we had Agile-y like things. And to me, that's again the default, and it seems to be the default at most of the clients that I'm at, especially the ones writing Ruby. And it's been a lot of fun to read about teams that were not like that, and to this day aren't, and Ruby's still influencing those teams in the Ruby community as we move out. Someone had mentioned earlier, we're still influencing people. So I just thought that was an interesting connection between the Agile community and the Ruby community.
And it's easy to take for granted what the dynamic nature of Ruby was, and the meta programming, and just the core idea that seems to fit Agile really well. That of course we're malleable. Of course we're going to share ideas and make something better. It fits the Agile rhythm really, really well. That we're working together. We're solving an actual problem that somebody's going to consume, rather than we're building a foundation that's going to be solid and untouchable. I mean, yeah, we want dependable code, but it seems that, yeah, Ruby and agility it really does work well together.
So what are some of the things that new Ruby developers, in your opinion, are kind of missing that maybe some of the more seasoned people have gotten over the years? What kind of context do you think they're tending to lack?
But I think that Josh just raised a really good point, which is, I think it's kind of a shame that Agile, to the extent that so in the enterprise, Agile became this snake oil of increasingly complex schemes by which people would sell books and training and consulting, and now you have this safe monstrosity which looks exactly like ridiculous schemes that Agile was actually designed to replace. But in the open source kind of bred ecosystems, and Ruby and JavaScript are among those, you see instead that Agile has become ideology. So Josh, when he started, he was doing Agile-y things, he guesses, but he only even knows that now because he's had the benefit of, working with other people who kind of can explain the background, the history, the thinking. When you read Extreme Programming Explained, it spends a ton of time talking about values and principles, the thought behind the activities that they chose, and that the bedrock was the values, and the principles were layered on top of those, and then the practices were meant to be malleable and change and respond. But nowadays, the things like pull request workflows and stand-ups and Scrum and story points and storyboards, all of that's so rigidly adhered to on so many teams because they just kind of were handed that on day one and didn't really get the story behind it, and were never able to really master how to improvise on top. And so really getting sort of a remedial Agile education about where a lot of this stuff came from, why it was necessary at the time, what that moment in history meant, but like what are the takeaways for like how a modern team should work together. That's something that I find a conversation I have to have with a lot of literally younger programmers who just weren't around for that sort of sea change.
Well, I was just going to mention, I was going to save this for the picks, but I wanted to, you had asked what context people are missing today. And a huge piece is Jim Weirich, and I cannot stress enough. I'd seen one or two of Jim's talks previously, and while I was doing the research for this, I watched one or two, and then I just took a day and I just watched everything on Consprix that he'd ever given. The technical topics were always brilliant and insightful, but there was something past that too. There was like just this air about him. I never had the pleasure of meeting him. Like you could just tell how he spoke and how he would interact with the audience. Like he was just so excited to be there. He had a love for people. He had a love for Ruby. It inspired me. It got me thinking like, okay, what can I do to make the community to be this way with the community, just like he was doing. I'm not sure that I'm not sure exactly what we can do with that, but I think that we should all be just using him as an example still. And I'm going to be reminding myself, to watch him speak, because it's just so gratifying and inspiring to see someone who cares so much and has so much love.
I last night driving in was actually thinking about him, Jim Weirich. I flew to Texas once for a conference and took an all-day class on testing from him. And it was so compassionate the way he taught. He leaned over my shoulder and looked at my code and asked me questions so that it empowered me. That it wasn't about him being the smart one in the room. It was him making me the smart one in the room. And I absolutely agree. That love, that commitment, that joy, that boyish joy he brought. Hey, look, I did this thing. I love how he would talk about Rake. Like, ooh, that's an interesting problem. And he goes away for a couple hours, comes back. Hey, what do you think about this? Just that boyish joy of creating something and that collaborative way. And I think that carrying that torch is important. That in our careers, that as we speak, as we show up at meetups, as we train our teams, as we bring in new people and are inclusive, that we have that perspective that person can, if it's our job to be the mentor or the trainer or the leader, that our job is to lift them so that they see the way Jim taught us to be. I love that part of our heritage.
Absolutely, and use the term compassionate teacher, and it reminded me of a clip from Matt's, and he said, "Why do we love Ruby?" And then he followed it up with, "Wait, love a programming language? That's really kind of a strange concept. This is just ones and zeros." But there definitely is a theme. Matt's has it. Jim certainly had it. Of no, this is about people. This is about loving people, being compassionate to people, and using a really great tool that we all love to use collectively.
And our organizations can't afford not to have our whole selves at the workplace. I mean, we've got to be there as a whole person that's compassionate, committed, clear, that's balanced and contributing and working one with another. I mean, it's not just plunking down code. It's being involved and being committed, which that's a huge part of what we do, and that's why projects go forward. That's why agility works. That's why teams coalesce. So yeah, absolutely. Oh man, thank you for bringing up Jim.
Well, do we have any final points that y'all want to talk about? Should we move on to Pixel? All right,
let's do it.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
All right, Eric, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I've been on a TV show binge picks lately, pick binge. And the most recent one that two of them that I love. One of them was actually I learned about as a pick from another one of our guests. I can't remember who it was, but BoJack Horseman. I heard about that on Ruby Rogues. It intrigued me. I watched all 4 seasons or 5 seasons, whatever it was, and it reminds me of the old MTV mini series anime called The Max, right? The Max was a fantastic piece of art that was put into video form through MTV, and in the same line, I think that BoJack Horseman is actually art. And a really interesting insight into humanity. It's really cool that these, I feel like such a grown up watching these shows. I just learned so much watching my cartoons. It's great. And the other show that I've gotten into, and it's weird because I think I got into it the opposite way. So the show is called Orville. Orville is like a Star Trek show, right? But it's a parody of Star Trek. But the point is that it's not super, super funny. It's just high quality content. And most people I imagine are Trekkies, and they're like, oh, I like Trekkie, I like Star Trek, and I like Family Guy, so I'm going to watch Orville. But for me, it's kind of the opposite. I like Family Guy, and now I like Orville, so now I kind of want to watch Star Trek. So anyway, it's got those are my 2 picks. Sorry I rambled and ranted there, but yeah, very, very fun.
Yeah. I think Orville is more Star Trek-y than the new Star Trek Discovery is.
Oh, interesting.
Definitely. My wife and I came to the exact same agreement.
But both are great shows. David Richards, what are your picks?
So I'm going to follow Eric's lead here and pick a TV series. And before you boo me, I'm going to tell you that somebody smart reminded me that this is the most Shakespearean storytelling that we have in a generation, and it's Gilmore Girls, and I love that show, and I didn't know why I loved it until I took a minute and looked at it. I mean, yeah, it's just people talking, but it's funny and it's fast and it's ridiculous, and it uses the same kind of ridicule that Shakespeare used, and it gives us a big mirror. And if we're going to build communities that work, then sometimes it really works to take a look at how we're affecting each other. And that was the whole point of Gilmore Girls, was they said, hey, we're going to make a show about a mother and daughter, yes, but we're going to make a show about how their choices affect each other. And it's not like cautionary tell you how to be. They make a lot of mistakes. But it's fun, it's joyful, and it's easy to have it on while I'm programming. I can have my laptop on and Gilmore Girls on, and I'm a very happy programmer. The other pick I'm going to make is Julia. It's based on a programming language called Julia, and so there's a blog article I'll share. It's on machine learning and programming languages, and it's the same concept of using good tools for the right problems. I love Python for a lot of my data work, and I love Clojure, and I love Elixir, and I love a lot of these tools that are great. Julia is doing an amazing job of building a very useful, dynamic language that works really well when you have a lot of numbers you're computing. So anyway, I'll share that with you guys as well.
Awesome. And Justin?
Okay, I got a few picks today. Try to pick some stuff from different categories. One is one that we weren't able to find a spot for in the presentation, but I think is a ton of fun. And I've got really fond memories of pairing with non-programmers on this bit. It was another Ryan Bates joint as well in the gem Ruby Warrior. Ruby Warrior is like a little CLI game where you, from the command line and with just a single Ruby file, you define a warrior subclass or maybe just a class that's like duck typed appropriately. That can do certain things, like you program it to move through multiple levels of this tower. Sort of like you're creating like a little intelligence, like what to do when you sense an enemy in front of you, and like how to kind of explore these mazes so that you get to the end and survive. And you have hit points and all that. And so it's a really engaging, fun little game. And it's like legit difficult. And one of the great things about it is that after you master like the beginning areas, you start to realize that you're going to need some kind of abstraction to break up the complexity. And so it becomes like a really fun refactoring exercise. So if you've never taken the time to check out the Ruby Warrior gem, it still totally works and is a lot of fun. I'll pick a game too. Lately, I've been incredibly motivated to put on a VR headset and headphones and just shut the entire world out. I don't know why that might be in this era that we live in, but I've been playing the hell out of Skyrim VR for PSVR. Even though Skyrim is 6 years old and I put 200 hours into it the first time, I'm somehow already 100 hours into a brand new save file, and I'm just finding it super duper immersive and engaging, and successfully tricking my brain into thinking that I do not live in 2018 America every hour of the day, which has been welcome. And then my last pick is a little coffee pot that I bought. So, on the range of sort of like artisanal hoity-toity hipster ways to make coffee, the smallest one that I have available to me is an AeroPress, and that's what I use typically every day. But whenever I have like a guest over, or if I want to make multiple cups of coffee, I don't really have a good answer for that, and I didn't want to go like full-blown get a Chemex or get another big machine for it, and so I got this really cool Osaka pour-over coffee maker that is supposedly, though I never saw it in Osaka, like a method of pour-over coffee that has got like a really, really nice steel mesh, a reusable filter, so I don't have to deal with like filter replacement. That makes just, like 8 cups of coffee and that's it. So, and it's like small, low profile, and I can keep it on the counter without worrying about it. So I've been really, really pleased with that.
Awesome. And Josh?
I've got a few. I've got a couple technical picks and one game. I mentioned at the beginning that I've been really enthralled with Elm recently. And if you're not familiar, Elm is a compile to JavaScript language. The best pitch I think I can give Elm is I'm not very good at JavaScript. So I spend a lot of time like in the Chrome console trying to figure out like what is going on and why my JavaScript, like if I click the button, it's not doing the thing. You just don't really have that experience with Elm. Like once it compiles, you like tab over to Chrome and it works. And it's really, really gratifying and it's a lot of fun. The compiler is just fantastic. I really can't recommend it enough. The learning curve is super gradual and you can just jump right in. I definitely encourage you to try it. My second pick is a text editor. Interestingly enough, I've been spending a lot of time with Spacemacs recently, and it's a lot of fun. So I really love Vim bindings and moving around my editor. And so Spacemacs is a Emacs configuration that uses all of like the Vim bindings, but puts this really nice like Emacs-y thing around it, where it's super discoverable and it's a lot of fun to use. It's just a lot of fun. So I definitely encourage that. The last pick that I've got is a game that my dad actually told me to download yesterday. And so I proceeded to spend like 4 hours playing it last night. It's called Mini Metro on iOS. It's like this little like subway builder game. It's really simple and it's kind of mindless, but it's kind of puzzly at the same time. You basically just like have this little subway and stops keep getting added to it. And you have to decide like whether or not to extend existing lines or like draw new lines to them. It's a lot of fun and it's really, it's a nice way to like end your day with a little mindlessness. And that's all for me.
Awesome. And I have 2 picks. One is a game called A Good Snowman is Hard to Build. And it's a little puzzle thing where you have to basically build a snowman on each level. And it was something that I was showing my 4-year-old how to play. And she actually started, solving some of these more complex puzzles. So it was a lot of fun, playing with her. And it's for iOS. I don't know if it's for Android, but it's a fun game. And the other one is DOSstrap, which is a Bootstrap 3 or Bootstrap 4 theme that basically transforms your web application into the old MS-DOS 6.2 look and feel. So if you remember that blue screen with, really ugly and stuff, I came across this the other day and I think it's just hilarious and pretty well done too. So just kind of shows the power of, you don't have to use the standard old look and feel of Bootstrap. You can customize it to your own look and feel if you have enough time and effort. All right. Well, Josh and Justin, if people want to get a hold of you and find you, where do they go and look?
You can find me at Josh T. Greenwood on twitter.com.
And I am on almost all things my last name Searls, which my wife, who's a teacher, has learned the mnemonic of spelling verbally with it's like the word pearls, but with an S instead of the P.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, for being on the show today. It was a lot of fun talking with y'all.
Definitely.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
All right. We'll catch you later.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.